Welcome to the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, your guide to motorsports sponsorship. Here's your host, Josh Weesey.
Welcome to this episode of the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, which is powered by 4Wheel Parts. Today, we're diving into part 3 of a 3-part series on understanding valuations. So part 1 was back on episode 213, and that's when we introduced the topic. We went through some key concepts and terms. Part 2, we went through a bunch of intricacies about tangible assets and intangible assets, including calculating those things. And then this one, part 3, we're talking about presenting the package deal. So that's what we're going to hit in this show. First, there's a couple of things that I want to cover with you. 4Wheel Parts has some good deals going on right now. A specific one, they've got 15% off of Method race wheels. I just bought a set of wheels. I ended up going with Icon Vehicle Dynamics wheels from 4Wheel Parts, but Method was a close second. But it would be tough to pass up on 15% off on some Method race wheels. They got $200 off bumpers, so that's Smitty built, Poison Spider. There's a bunch of other options out there, so you can check that out. And something kind of interesting, I don't know if everybody knows this, 4Wheel Parts has, I think it's 92 locations in the U.S., and they have like packages that you can purchase and get installed. So for example, like if you have a Jeep JK, which I've had one in the past, you can buy like a package deal and have them install it for like $4,500. And that's pretty neat. Like just thinking one-stop shop, this is what I want. I want my vehicle to look this certain way. Let's just make this thing happen. So that's pretty cool from a one-stop shop standpoint. I know for me, I get a little overwhelmed trying to figure out all the different configurations that I want for my vehicle. I'm working on a build for my 2017 Raptor. It won't be that extreme, I don't think, but there's just so many different variables that you got to consider. It's kind of nice that they offer packages and then they just install them for you. So I like that. So if you got questions about it, head over to 4wheelparts.com and you can actually call them 1-800-284-9840. Now this show has been around for a little while now. This is episode 217. And almost every single show, I tell folks, please head over to iTunes or Apple Podcasts and leave that rating and review. It is a really good way to promote the show and get more exposure. iTunes places a high value on ratings and reviews when they're presenting the show to other listeners. So that's huge. I would appreciate if you did that. And then I also ask to subscribe. So it doesn't matter what podcast platform you use, subscribe, because that is the easiest way, I think, to get the shows automatically downloaded to your phone versus going on the website or YouTube or something like that to listen. If you ever want to just reach out to me, head over to any of the social media, shoot me a DM or shoot me an email, josh@sponsoredriderclubpodcast.com. Now this episode here is brought to you by several awesome companies. AMSOIL, they provide amazing lubrication, and they are a company that runs on freedom. You can find out more at amsoil.com/rider. TopThePodium.com. They're experts in motorsport sponsorship and website creation, and they have been with us since episode 6 as a sponsor, and they were featured on episode 2. Crash Addict Industries, they provide human protection and extreme racing products. And I also want to shout out some of our other partners, including UTV Sports Mag, MBRP, HMK USA, Studboy Traction, and High Octane Coffee. The latest issue of UTV Sports Mag is out there, and it has one of our articles in it about endemic versus non-endemic sponsorship, so you can check that out. Now it's time to get in the show. I've got a little marketing tune-up from High Octane Coffee where Joe Sylvester gives you a little tidbit of advice. He's talking today about doing your homework on sponsorship. So once you hear from Joey, we will get into the meat of the program.
What's up, everybody? Joe Sylvester here with your High Octane Coffee marketing tune-up of the day. Today I want to talk about a little bit of homework. Doing your homework on a company before you even think about approaching them for a sponsorship. That's a big, big thing. You know, you need to understand the company and a little bit about what they're all about and what their marketing strategies and tactics are before you even approach them. Make sure that they align with what you're doing and make sure that you're going to be able to bring something to the table for them. Check up on their social media. Look at maybe who else they're sponsoring. See how you fit into the picture, and absolutely use their product. Even if you just try it for the first time, make sure it's something that you believe in, something that you feel confident in endorsing. So definitely, before approaching a company, do your homework, research that company, and learn as much as you possibly can about them so you can have an intelligent conversation with them when you finally do reach that marketing executive to talk to them about sponsoring your race program.
So this show is focused on packaging, valuations, and ultimately presenting it to a sponsor. This is eventually going to be part of a sponsorship deck. Now, we could probably focus in like an entire series on just creating a sponsorship deck. But this show is going to be breaking down just one part of that sponsorship deck, not the whole thing. If you need that information now, in one small little package, you can actually reach out to Jeff at toptopodium.com and he can help you. That's one of the reasons why he's been a long-term partner of ours, is he does that stuff. Like, that's his thing. So if you need that immediately and you're not going to be able to go back through and listen to all the shows, you can reach out to him and he can help you with that. But in the meantime here, I want to talk about the valuation part of the sponsorship deck and how it all fits together. I do think, though, it's helpful to start the show discussing the concept of packaging the valuation. Understanding what it really means and how the sponsor views it, I think is critical, and it ultimately should help you put together a more compelling pitch. So the first half of the show is going to focus on the concept and hammer that in, and then the second half is going to focus on the presentation. So in the past, we have talked and discussed about preparing a budget, how to do that, and how to track and maintain your costs. I've actually offered up to folks that I could send them a budget, like a template, and that offer still exists. If you're listening, you can shoot me an email, josh@sponsoredriderclubpodcast.com. I can send that over to you. But, this concept isn't far from how you would prepare a valuation document. So let me step back for a minute, though, and describe an income statement to you. And that should help bring these two concepts together. So the two concepts being, your valuations and then your costs. What are the differences between those two things? And how does that play into an income statement? So an income statement is something a business uses to manage their finances. They're also referred to as a P&L sometimes, profit and loss. They start with revenues, subtract expenses, and then ultimately calculate a profit. So the formula in the most basic sense is revenue minus expenses equals profit. Now, that's an extremely oversimplified version of an income statement, but hopefully it makes sense to you. So from your perspective as the rider or the racer preparing a budget, you would consider your revenue as the money you receive from a sponsorship. So that's the money that you're getting from a sponsor, assuming it's cash, and that goes into your revenue column. That is essentially what your valuation total ends up being. So in part 2, we got into how to calculate these things and how to actually figure out what your valuation would be. That ends up being what your revenue is, assuming, right, that you get a sponsor to buy in and give you this money. So if your valuation calculations result in, let's say, $1,000, and you have one sponsor paying you that, your revenue would be $1,000. Now, if all of your costs and expenses add up to $900, that means you have $100 in profit. So 1,000 minus 900 is 100. Again, this is super way oversimplified, and there's many other factors to consider, but the main concept is sound, and that's what I want you to take away from this. When you're putting together your revenue, that's basically what your valuation ends up being. When you put together your budget, slash all of your costs and stuff and track that. That's your expenses. And then your profit is the difference between those two. All right. So now that you've got an understanding of how your expenses and valuations play into your overall budget, we can dive into what is actually presented. Now, I recommend you present your valuations, not your overall budget. So some riders and racers take their total costs and then tell their sponsors that is how much they want. So going back to my previous example, I said, hey, there's $900 in my cost. If you just go to sponsors and say, give me $900, that might not be an accurate representation, and it's not capturing what your value is. So the main problem with this approach is that, your cost might not reflect what your value truly is, and that is really what the sponsor is paying for. It could go both ways. You could be spending way more than you're worth, or you're worth way more than you're spending. So your cost could exceed your value, meaning you are losing money. And guess what? That's part of business sometimes. All right, to flip that, you need to either increase your value you bring or decrease your costs. Now, some sponsors might ask you if they can cover your fuel expenses or cover your travel expenses. In that case, share away, do it up. The difference with that is they are asking for it. In a value pitch, you're going to want to lead with the value, not the cost. Just remember, though, the value you provide to them and the amount you, quote unquote, charge for your efforts does impact their income statement. You better believe it, they got an income statement, even small companies, right? Hopefully, it increases their revenue and decreases their expenses over time. That's the point. That's return on investment. However, up front, it might look to them like it just increases their expenses. And you are trying to prove the first scenario I described, where you're, improving the revenues and decreasing their expenses. You're trying to prove that the value you add to them is more profitable than the cost of sponsoring you and more profitable than doing something else with that money. So if they're going to invest, $100 in Facebook ads and they could give you $100 instead, you're trying to prove to them that investing $100 in you is going to improve their profitability more than investing $100 in a Facebook ad. So I felt it was important to really break down some of these financial aspects here so you know what you're presenting, how it impacts them, and I do think that understanding that will help you package it better, because I'm going to give you examples of how to kind of lay it out and package it, but the more you know about what it really means, the more likely you're going to come up with a more creative way of presenting it that fits the needs of the sponsor better. That's my whole approach with this show. Is I've told people up front, I don't feel like I can give you a true formula for how to do all this stuff. Now, from a valuation standpoint, there are some hard ways or specific ways that you can calculate something and present it, but a formula for a sponsorship package is, there's just so many moving factors and variables all the time. I'd rather teach you the concepts, and I'd rather teach you examples and different ways people have seen it, so that you can come up with your own ways of doing it going forward. So that's the intent of that. The approach that I've used for the entire show and definitely for this valuation series. But hopefully I've given you enough details where you've got a starting point. All right, so right now I want to pause for a second, take a break to thank the sponsor for this podcast, and when we return, I will discuss the core concepts now of packaging, your valuation. In my opinion, this is the easy part. I kind of described the last episode in this series around doing all the calculations and understanding tangible versus intangible assets. I think that's the hard part. I think packaging it is easier. Now, some people might disagree with me, but I think once you get all that information together, presenting it is not as hard. One of the reasons I say that too is there is this phenomenon that happens when you're going through and calculating all these different things and asking all these different questions. You're learning more and more about what value you truly bring. And I think that once you learn that, you gain confidence and it's much easier to present. So again, I'm going to take a break right now, thank the sponsors of this podcast, and we'll come into the second half of the show strong. 2 questions I get continuously about this show and about sponsorship is, do I need my own website and do I need a resume? The answer is, in my opinion, yes to both, and that's why we partner with topthepodium.com. Now, if you want to see an example of what a professional website and what a professional resume looks like, you gotta check out topthepodium.com. They did my website. The Sponsored Rider Club podcast website is sponsoredriderclubpodcast.com. That was created by Jeff Vanistall of topthepodium.com. I think it's awesome. I get a lot of good feedback about it. And there's a number of other websites out there that Jeff has produced that are just phenomenal. So I think it's important in this world of social media where you have control of your content. That's what a website does. It gives you full control. We don't know what Facebook's going to do sometimes. We don't know what Instagram's going to do. We don't know what Twitter's going to do. So if we don't have that central location to direct people and house our content, there is some risk that we incur. So I strongly recommend getting a website, talking to topthepodium.com. And then the resume, again, is massive. And if you want to stand out, get it done professionally. And honestly, it is one of the best ways to step up your game and present yourself in the best way possible. Safety is our overriding priority. I hear it all the time, but I have to ask myself, is it though? Is that the first thing we think of? Is that the first thing you think of? Over the past couple of years, we've seen the performance of production UTVs increase, somewhere around 350%. That means these machines give us a lot more opportunity to have fun and win races, but it also, unfortunately, gives us new opportunities to crash. And that's why we have partnered with Crash Addict Industries. The owner, Travis Pointer, became very accustomed to crashing early in his career. He saw it as inevitable, and he set out to make the process safer. With a passion for racing, welding, and engineering, Crash Addict Industries now produces full cage and other protection systems intentionally designed to protect you during an accident on the track. They also offer a line of human protection products through their vendors. Do this for me at this point. If you're racing with a stock cage right now, please go check out crashaddict.com and at least just see what they have to offer. Even if you choose to go with a different company, please make safety your overriding priority. Let's talk about your truck for a minute. You can count on it to haul your vehicle and your gear to the track or to the trailhead, but I bet you never think about the motor oil. Here's why you should. Your oil is the only thing preventing your engine from wearing out and breaking down. To keep your truck running strong, look for an oil with added wear protection. Like, for example, AMSOIL Signature Series Synthetic Motor Oil. It delivers 75% more engine protection against horsepower loss and wear than is required by the leading industry standard. It provides the next level protection today's demanding engines need to keep running for years and to keep effortlessly towing your ride to the track. Go to amsoil.com/rider to find out more. Make the switch to AMSOIL Synthetic Motor Oil today to keep your vehicle running great. Welcome back. We are getting ready to break down what this package presentation really looks like. And I said this right before the break here. I think this is the easy part. I don't even think I'm going to spend a ton of time really breaking this down because I do think it's fairly straightforward to get this piece put together. Now, also what I said earlier on the show is that this is part of a bigger sponsorship deck, and I think packaging all that together is that's more challenging. So I don't want to underscore or underplay how hard it can be to put together an entire sponsorship deck, but this piece I think is easier to package. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the elements that might go into an entire sponsorship deck. And it's just I'm touching on these. It's definitely not going to break all this down, but think about this as like your executive summary. Think about this as like what you're handing to somebody to say we're past the relationship building phase. We're past the initial get to know you phase, and we're into like the brass tacks of figuring out what business we're going to do going forward. And there are a million ways probably to present a sponsorship package and have it be a good one. There's definitely some bad ways, and I've talked about those in the show before, but think about this as like you might have different sections. Here's an overview of the sponsorship opportunity. Here's the marketing objectives. Here's measures of success. How do we know this is going to work or not work? And then value to the sponsor, right? And this is kind of where we're playing today, the section of value to the sponsor. What are the unique marketing initiatives? What are our specific terms and conditions? And like, what do I now need you to do? What's the call to action? I need you to sign this. Do I need to do something else with it? So this can be presented in a very visual format. TopThePodium.com, I've referenced them multiple times on the show already. They can present this in a lot of different ways. Nice PDFs, your own separate website pages. You could have printout documents. There's many, many ways to present this. It could be in a Word document. It can be in a PowerPoint, right? There's different ways to present it. But of all of those, like, kind of 7 buckets that I just mentioned, the sponsorship opportunities, marketing objectives, measure of success, value to the sponsor, unique marketing initiatives, terms and conditions, call to action, value to the sponsor is like one section of that. And I want you to think of it as you breaking down now all of these valuation pieces that you've calculated in part 2 of this series. So every single piece of value that you think you add, whether it's events or logo placement, social media reach, billboards, magazine articles, fan loyalty, all these things, I recommend that you start breaking them down and outline each one. Now, a good start to this, in my opinion, although it might not be the best, visual when you go to present it, you might need to tweak it a little bit. And that's where someone like Jeff could help, or if you have, a friend in the graphic design world, maybe you can make the chart look better. But I recommend starting with like an Excel spreadsheet where you break it down and you actually write in, one bucket is your tangible assets, and then you list every one of those things and then what your final calculation is. And you can show it as, your viewers times your dollars per view times your exposure rate, just like we talked about in the last show, and equals boom. And that is basically outlining how you came up with what your value is. So picture having a line item for each tangible asset that you plan to deliver, and here's your calculation, how you came up with that, and here's the resulting dollar value. You list all those out for your tangible calculations, and you get this number, and that's your total tangible value. So picture it that way. You've got this bucket of tangible assets, you've got all your calculations factored in, and you've got a final number that says, here's my tangible value. And then I recommend doing the same thing for intangible. List all of those things out. Again, if you want to go back and hear all the details, part 2 of the series breaks it down like in excruciating detail, but it's all there. Break those things down into all these different value and how you calculated it, and then you have a total for your intangible assets, and then you can have a total. Intangible plus tangible equals boom. This is the value I'm going to bring. And then you say, this is what I'm asking for, right? It doesn't have to be that exact number if you want to do a discount to it, right? And which is something I talked about in the last show too. you can do that and you can show it right here. Here's the value I bring, $1 million. However, I'm going to provide this to you for $500,000. And that is where your benefit comes in as a sponsor. So this could be presented very visually pleasing with like I said, with the right graphic designer behind it. I think people refer to this as infographics. There's definitely softwares out there that can take your Excel style information and present it very nicely, and that might be a way of doing this. So Power BI is something that I've seen used before. You can also like manually create these things too. Word and PowerPoint and Excel have ways of formatting things very nicely and exporting those into some sort of electronic format that looks good. I recommend doing that. But worst case scenario, if you are just getting started and you are working out of a Word document and you just take an Excel file and dump it in there, I think that's okay, right? I think that the point is to capture all of that information and present it. So that is really the main element of this of what I want to talk about is packaging, is listing it all out. And I don't think you should hold back here on the details. There might be a portion of your sponsorship deck where you have a summary where you're not necessarily describing all the details. So you want someone quickly to know what you're asking for and how much. But this is the detailed portion of it, and I don't think you should hold back on all the different things. If you're going to have 15 billboards, you write down that you're going to have 15 billboards. If you're going to have a Twitter, a TikTok, a YouTube, and all these different channels, I think you write all of those down individually to show how much exposure you're really bringing. And like I said, you can do that in an Excel file. You can do it in many other ways, but to get started, I think it's just important to write it all down and show that you've thought through each of these different elements. I think that's very critical. Now, in presenting it to somebody, this might happen over email. It might be face-to-face. It might be at an event where you hand somebody this document and you'd never even get the opportunity to present it. There's different ways it could come about, but let's just talk through a couple of these real quick and see how you might do it. So probably the most important and stressful one for folks would be a face-to-face presentation. Some companies would have you come into, say, a boardroom and present it to, their marketing representatives, maybe some of their business leaders, and they might expect you to have a PowerPoint presentation or some other format and walk through that in front of these people, and they're going to ask you questions about it. This can be scary for people. And there's classes you can take to help you with this. Dale Carnegie is a class that helps you feel more comfortable presenting things in front of people. There's tons of other ways you could do that. But my point here is that if you're in that situation, you would have, say, a slide that breaks down, here's my tangible assets. Here's another one that breaks down my intangible assets. Here's my total valuation summary and how much I'm asking. And that is just part of that package presentation. So that's one way. Another one, you might end up handing somebody a document, and whether it's electronic transfer, maybe it's a USB file that you give somebody, a USB drive that you give somebody. In that case, you're not going to have the opportunity to talk through the valuation. It's going to have to be self-explanatory. Like the document is going to have enough detail so that they know what you are saying. In a presentation, it can be more visual, and you provide that additional information. Now, let's say that you do have a presentation planned, and you've created some sort of PowerPoint, and you're presenting it. You should also, at that point, I think, bring a printout or USB drives to hand out to folks so that they can reference the information later. Your presentation could be fantastic, and they're still going to have questions later because they might not remember all the individual details. So it's going to be important for you to have this packaged multiple ways if you're presenting or not presenting. Now, if they don't want you to present, then maybe you never have this PowerPoint, or maybe you never have some other format like that. Maybe you don't have a big board that you create, like a, what I mean by a big board is like this thing that you bring into a presentation, you put on an easel, and then you talk through it. Like maybe you don't have something like that because you're not expected to present, in which case the document that you put together is it, or the website that you end up putting together is it. But if you have to present, I recommend you also have these other things. And the reason why I say the website piece too is, I've seen people do that, and I know Jeff at Top to Podium has done that for folks where they'll create a website just for a pitch, and then you can give the link to your sponsors and they can go on that and check it out. So that is an option too. Okay, these are the main concepts that I wanted to talk through today about packaging this. If you have more specific questions about how to do it, again, I've said it multiple times on the show, but you can reach out to me and we can talk through some of those things. You can also Google this sort of stuff. You can look up, sponsorship valuation template, and sometimes you can find even downloadable versions of it, right into Excel or some other format, and you can start mapping those things out. But I think in the purest sense of things, the point is break these things down into the buckets, put it into your presentation or your document, and have it descriptive enough where someone reading the document does not need you there to walk through it. They can understand how you came up with that conclusion. And sometimes that means special formatting, colors for green, highlighting value add. Maybe if it's a comparison, maybe the red is your competitors, like if you're competing against a Facebook ad or another billboard that they could be investing in, maybe you show those as red. But the point is breaking these things down to an element where people can understand it without you walking through it. If it's a presentation, I think that it goes the other way, where you should be adding value by describing what you are presenting, and the supporting evidence can be given later in your standard document. All right. That is it for today. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this show, and I hope that you've been able to consume the entire evaluation series. I said this in part 2, and it reigns true for part 3 here. This has been the most challenging series that I've put together. I haven't done much with series. I think I did a youth sponsorship series once, but I've never really done a 3-episode breakdown of like one main topic. And it's been something that's not on my list for a long time to produce, and I just never really felt like I fully understood enough of the entire concept to like break it all down. And I feel like now I'm at that point, and I'm glad that I took the time to break it down. I hope that it added value for you. If you need to, go back through, listen to episode 1, 2, and 3 again. I think that, again, episode 2 is the most challenging one because that involves the actual calculations for intangible and tangible assets. You might have to listen to that one 3 or 4 times and take some notes down. I also recommend picking up a copy of Motorsports Marketing and Sponsorship. So Alex Stryler wrote this book. I think it's copyright 2016. So some of the factors might be a little bit older. I referenced it a lot in episode 2 as well, but he has chapters that focus on valuations as well. And I think that it's critical to understand those on a deeper level. I think these shows can get you a really good start. This valuation series can get you a really good start, but you might still have questions that the show is not answering, and that book might help you. So that's it. Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to leave you with this. Have fun and ride safe. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Sponsored Rider Club podcast, which is powered by 4-Wheel Parts. I want you to make sure that you are subscribed to this show, whether it's on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss upcoming guests and upcoming episodes. And then follow us on social media. We're on all of the platforms. You can find out the most content, though, on our Facebook page. That's where we do our live videos. To get some insider access to upcoming guests, you can also check out the Sponsored Rider Club on Facebook. It is a support network where you can ask questions about best practices and get feedback from our audience. And I also highly encourage you to check out our column in UTV Sports Magazine called Sponsor This. A special thanks goes out to our sponsors, 4-Wheel Parts, AMSOIL, TopThePodium.com, and Crash Addict Industries. And I also want to shout out some of our other partners, MBRP, HMK USA, Studboy Traction, and High Octane Coffee. I look forward to serving you again next week. Until then, have fun and ride safe.